Welcome to Lesson 3. You can think of this lesson like your gear guide. We'll look at reminders of what to pack and recommendations for what types of gear to choose for that upcoming feeding adventure. Be sure to check out the printable field guide because I've included some specific products that I recommend and some of the things that I might show here in this course. Let's begin with the most obvious piece of feeding gear you'll need, a chair. Even if you already have a high chair, let's make sure it's a good fit for your baby. Here's some things to consider. The first is upright positioning. This is so important, guys, and it's probably the most important thing to consider when comparing high chairs. Your baby, or your child, or really you for that matter, should not eat semi-reclined, and what I mean by that is leaned back at an angle. We don't want gravity pulling food toward the back of the mouth before your baby's ready to swallow. So please promise me that you won't feed your little one in a bouncy seat or a car seat or a swing. And if your high chair has that seat recline feature like so many of them do, just please don't use it when your baby's eating. If your baby's having trouble sitting straight up during that food readiness step that we talked about in Lesson 1, that's okay, and it's all right to use the seat recline feature or some extra padding to support your baby. But remember, if your baby can't sit steadily upright in his high chair, he's just not ready for food yet, and so you should stay in that food readiness stage until he is. Another option that many parents are interested in is a feeder seat. Feeder seats are smaller than standard high chairs, and they don't have legs. Usually you strap them to an adult chair, or maybe some of them sit on the floor. Most of these provide upright positioning, and so I don't discourage parents from using them with one important exception, and that is the foam bumbo seat, or any similar device that's kind of scooped out like a bucket seat. I won't go into all the ins and outs here, but in a nutshell, these seats position your baby in a way that's not helpful for eating. If you choose a feeder seat, be sure to select one with a flat seat for your baby's bottom, and be very aware that these can tip, so countertops and tables aren't safe places to use them. Ideally, at meal times, your child's feet would be well supported on a footrest, so that his hips, knees, and ankles are bent at about 90 degrees, or like the corner of a square. This is the seating position that provides the most stability, remember that hula hoop example, and therefore best supports the coordination of the mouth and hands. And those are both super important for feeding. I've personally found that it's kind of tough to find high chairs at lower price points that have adjustable footrests and that support this ideal sitting position. And feeder seats that strap to a chair definitely don't have them. So odds are, if you already have a chair in your home, you might be realizing right now that it doesn't have an adjustable footrest. Now, you might be able to find some workarounds like sliding a small chair or a stool, maybe even an end table in front of your kiddo's high chair, and that can create a little footrest, but that also might get really annoying and impractical. So I've included in the printable field guide a simple DIY footrest you can make to give almost any high chair an adjustable footrest. Okay, so taking my OT hat off for a moment and leaving my mom hat on, which, gosh, I don't think I can ever really take that mom hat off. Let's look at some practical considerations when it comes to trays for your high chair. While a one-handed tray release isn't a make or break high chair feature, it sure is convenient. You may also see some seats without a tray at all, and these are intended to slide right up to the table. I love this idea, and we used one of these with my firstborn, but honestly, I don't think our tabletop will ever be the same. I've also since learned that this type of chair leads to many emergency room visits for kids who push themselves back from the table and they wind up tipping backwards in the chair. So with 2020 hindsight, for our second baby, we chose a chair with its own tray. You may also want to consider portability for travel. If your high chair is big and bulky or doesn't fold up, I highly recommend having a more compact one if you frequently travel. Okay, OT hat back and on to our next piece of gear. If you're starting baby with purees, you'll need some spoons. And let's be honest, we all eat purees. It's part of a normal table food diet, things like yogurt and applesauce, so you're really going to need spoons no matter what feeding approach you take. I recommend having a couple of different styles of spoons on hand for your baby to try. First, I like to have a spoon with a long handle so that both you and your baby can hold together. And second, a spoon with a shorter, chunkier handle for baby to try on its own. You're going to want to look for spoons with a small, shallow bowl, since those are going to be easiest for a baby to clear with closed lips. Now, you might run across spoons that are bent at an angle, and they're specifically for right or left-handed kiddos. These can be really helpful for toddlers who are just learning to use utensils, but your baby really isn't ready to be orienting a tool like that, and your baby hasn't solidified yet if they're left or right-handed. So we definitely don't want to use utensils that dictate that, so you want to look for ambidextrous utensils without that bent handle. Some babies are enthusiastic eaters who don't care what spoon you use or whether or not you help to hold it, or in the case of my firstborn, what's on it. But many babies are more cautious, and some, like my second baby, don't want anyone to help hold the spoon. Some of these more hesitant eaters also have a distinct preference for the texture or the shape of their spoons, and you really won't know which type of eater you have until after you've started feeding. And you won't know what type of spoon works best for your baby right away. You don't need to collect a dozen different spoons to start off with, but start your feeding journey prepared with both a long-handled and short-handled option, and just know that you can experiment with more if your baby's struggling at meal times. Now, since I'll be covering fork feeding at the end of part 2 of this course, let's also talk now about choosing a fork. You're going to want to look for ones that are short, chunky handled, and that have prongs that might actually pierce something. Obviously, you don't want super sharp, pointy prongs that would break skin, but you also don't want those rounded ones that wouldn't even pierce a pancake. I've included some utensils that I like and use in the printable field guide for this course. When it comes to looking for plates or bowls, it's important to realize that both spoon and fork feeding are going to be easiest for your baby when there's a little wall to push the food up against. It's best to look for a divided plate or a bowl with sturdy high sides. You also don't want your baby's bowl or plate to be slip-sliding all over the tray or the table, so look for silicone ones or ones with non-skid bottoms, or you can always use a non-skid placemat that could fit on baby's tray. As you'll see in part 2 of this course, a mesh or a silicone feeder is a tool that I often use. It's a really helpful piece of gear for your new eater. Mesh and silicone feeders allow you to put solid foods in a pouch that baby can hold and munch and chew safely. The mesh style worked great for my first baby, but they do need to be thoroughly cleaned right away or else they get kind of gunky and crusty and gross. With a second baby in the house and the dishes piling up after meals, I really couldn't avoid the gunk, and so I switched to a silicone feeder instead, and I have to tell you, I love it. So either mesh or silicone, it's mainly a choice of convenience and preference, and I've included both in that printable field guide. Just to prepare you, baby meal times are going to be messy. The baby-led approach that I recommend, even more so. That might make some of you cringe and want to stock up on laundry detergent right now, but a good bib can really go a long way. I love the plastic bibs with a little trough at the bottom to catch spills, but some brands are a little bit rigid and stiff and they can be a little bit too wide for a beginning feeder. So I've included a soft, flexible brand in the printable field guide to try, especially as your baby gets a little bit bigger, and they work great for toddlers. For beginning feeders, you can also just use standard cloth bibs. The fuller coverage, the better. And because babies quickly learn to yank Velcro bibs right off, I prefer those with snaps or ties, or even the kind that pull over their head. I've also used a smock style bib that covers the arms, and those can be great, especially in cooler months when your baby would have long sleeves on. And never underestimate the option of stripping your baby down to his diaper for some of his meal times. You might be cleaning squash puree out of his little tiny belly button, but you won't be ruining an outfit. And it's perfect for right before baths. Finally, before we move past all these supplies, you may want to consider a splat mat, which is a cover that can help save your floor from the inevitable spills of baby and toddler meal times. And there are truly tons of different options out there. Many folks love something that they can throw in the washing machine. Personally, I prefer something that stays on the floor and isn't a tripping hazard, so we use a hard plastic mat that's actually designed for an office chair to roll on. It might not be the intended use, but it really works like a charm. We can sweep and mop it clean just like the floor, and it's clear, so you don't even notice it on our tile floors. Ultimately, the biggest things to remember when selecting baby gear are that upright positioning with foot support is best, and prepare for the mess, and you'll feel more comfortable letting mealtimes be baby-led.